Professor Sipho Seepe, a political analyst, joins me now for more. Professor, the Jacob Zuma Foundation today tweeted that the NPA and Mr. Zuma's lawyers had jointly agreed on a postponement. However, NPA spokesman Mthunzi Maga declined to comment on whether a postponement request had indeed been made. And we know this case has been highly politicized from both sides and is highly charged and complex. Are we to believe anything said ahead of trial proceedings, or should we trust only what happens inside the court?
Well, it's unfortunate that the NPA is not able to indicate its position. But what is most important for many people, especially given that this trial has been so politicized, is the importance of what you call a fair trial, and also making sure that the rights of the accused are not infringed. And this is a consideration that it appears that the lawyers of Jacob Zuma will be putting on the table. And if one is to believe what the Jacob Zuma Foundation says, it looks like there is an agreement. But also there's a possibility that it may be postponed for one reason only, that if it can be shown and proved that the former president is unwell, it will be seen as really not too much uncaring to expect him to go through a trial of this nature while he is unwell. So, but these are issues that will be ventilated in the courts by both the NPA as well as Jacob Zuma's lawyers.
So he is unwell. He is also not a young man. We do have to take those two factors into consideration. However, despite saying he's ready for his day in court, delay tactics have unfortunately characterized Jacob Zuma's legal strategy. So when do we say enough is enough, let's get on with it now so that we can have an outcome either way?
Yeah, I think we must be very careful about the notion of also delaying tactics. The state has the power, and the state can bring somebody to court if it needs to. And what is most important is that the state must be able to address all those issues. But when a person has rights to appeal, it cannot be seen as delaying tactics. It should be seen as exercising his right to what the Constitution provides. For instance, none of the courts have actually said to him that what you are doing in terms of appeal is illegal. But when you are faced with a challenge of your life, your lawyers will advise you to say you must make sure that by the time the trial begins, all these other concerns that you have about the fair trial should be addressed. So appealing, it's a right. It doesn't matter how many times you do it. It's your right. We may be impatient, we may be irritated, but also let us also be truthful about this, that the state itself has postponed this case a number of times. What we expect the state, which has all the powers and the resources, is that it should have made sure that they deal with this case expeditiously. Remember, this case will be coming to court for the fourth time. It was thrown out 3 times by 3 judges, Msimang, Nicholson, and the other judge, I can't remember his name. So there is an issue here that says, if they had dealt with it then, one Herbert Msimang did say this case has been limping from one crisis to another, blaming the state for that. He was not blaming Jacob Zuma. And yes, for those of us who are onlookers, we do expect that, as the Constitution requires, that when the state brings a case, it must be so foolproof that there should be no other forms in which it can be delayed. This case has been going on for almost 15 years.
There have been threats of unrest and subsequent police deployments to hotspots ahead of tomorrow's hearing, regardless of whether it's postponed or not. How do you see tensions playing out?
Well, I am not too sure that we are going to see the mayhem that we saw. What we might have will be small groups of people who may wish to protest. Remember, like you said, that this case is seen as a political persecution and prosecution. People also have a right to express their views. This is what being in a constitutional democracy means, that you express your frustration, your unhappiness, but you don't stop the state from continuing with its business. So if the state has to prosecute, it must continue to do so, but it must make sure that it is thoroughly prepared so that there should be no comebacks.
So we also have to look at people's rights within the context of COVID-19. And unfortunately, what we saw 2 or 3 weeks ago, while people had a right to show their displeasure, they were, in fact, by congregating en masse, breaking COVID-19 lockdown regulations. What's your opinion on the matter?
Well, I think the state has to find a way in which it manages that. And when it does that, it cannot be selective. Because we have seen also ministers addressing crowds while they were dealing with this issue of mayhem. We have seen the president surrounded by people while he was dealing with this mayhem that happened. So when you're going to talk about making sure that there's protocols, that there's a respect because of COVID, it must be consistent. And yes, it's a serious problem when we know that people are dying. And it also becomes irresponsible for those who lead people into a situation where they might expose themselves to unnecessary harm. We cannot afford any more lives to be lost when we can avoid it. So the message that has come from government of social distancing, the government and the state must be able to use its influence, whether through state power or through reaching out to people through education. But it's very important that we don't take this crisis, pandemic, as easy as we have actually seen. But when we do so, let us be consistent. It cannot be that we point it out to the people we dislike. But when we have certain people who we like and they also break the protocols, we keep quiet.
Agreed there. Despite no longer being in government, Jacob Zuma clearly still holds significant sway over many South Africans. What political sway does he hold over decision makers currently in government and the broader political landscape of our country?
I don't think if one thinks of the power base, you're talking about the power that emerges from state power through cabinet, the executive. I don't think he has power. He may have sympathizers there. If you're talking about political influence within the ANC, if one reads it carefully, you don't see a lot of sympathizers in numbers in the NEC. But on the ground, there is no doubt that he commands a lot of support and sympathy. So those are issues that when we go forward, we must actually be able to balance. But be that as it may, having a political following is no excuse for the state to say we cannot deal with these things properly. But it's also no excuse that the state must be prevented from doing what it's supposed to do.
Looking at the context of what the unrest that took place, and I'm going to be very careful here to separate looting and unrest and protests in support of Jacob Zuma, because we did see the two issues conflated. The two were not necessarily 100% tied together in all cases, but we did see the issue of former President Jacob Zuma's incarceration leveraged to create political tension and possibly to mobilize people into unrest. It seems the former statesman, although now retired, has some power to hold our national focus hostage. There are so many things that we should be concentrating on that are of crucial importance to people on the ground. Yet it seems that again and again our focus is turned towards former President Jacob Zuma. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, there's a reality in this country that precedes the mayhem. In this country, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've had a protest week in, week out. We've had the people marching. Remember, this is a country that is so used to protest. Even when the former president was still at the helm of the ANC government, you had the people in large numbers saying Zuma must fall. So the issue of protest is something that is normal. It's part of a democratic expression. But what we should be doing is to also read the mayhem as building on the week in, week out protest and people leveraging on what they saw as a sense of outrage. And I mean, right now, even the Constitutional Court on this matter is still dealing with it. If they were so clear about that we've done the best we can, we have delivered justice, people would not be complaining as they do, but also, most importantly, they will not be asking for more submissions. If you start asking for more submissions, you are also suggesting that maybe you may not have done it well. Remember also, during the submission, one of the judges in the Constitutional Court was insisting that the decision by the Constitutional Court or the majority was unlawful and unconstitutional. He, in saying that, this is a view that is shared by many other people. So the court itself must be compelling in its own argument. We should not get to a situation where we think certain judges have a vendetta. But we've seen that in this case, the judiciary needs to take a step back and ask itself whether the pronouncement they make outside the courtroom, the pronouncement they make in court, whether they are not political charged. Because when you do that, you are entering into a political space, and decisions that you make may be seen through a political lens instead of the lens of justice.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your opinions with us this evening. That was political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe.